Okay, that's better. Okay, everybody. Can we get a little more volume? Hello. There we go. Thank you. All right, everybody. Let's try to take some of the convos outside, or and let's. Or let's don't leave though. Don't leave. Okay, I take that back. All right. So, first of all, that was a great panel, by the way. To be followed. I lost my volume again? Okay, there we go. I don't want to hurt my voice. My name is Matt Doss. I've been asked to moderate this panel, and I'm privileged to be here. By way of background, I am the former longest-serving New York City Taxi and Limousine Commissioner. What that means is it was a very tough job. I'm lucky to be out alive, and there were times when I felt like all the taxis should just fly away and it would be a good day. But now we actually do have flying taxis and we have other things going on. I have a lot of different hats I wear now. One of them is I am the Transportation Technology Chair at the City University of New York at City College with a US DOT-funded center. We've done reports on the airport of the future, and I have one now, very apropos, the ferry of the future that we're working on. And I also am president of the IATR, the International Association of Transport Regulators. Those are all the licensing agencies, government agencies around the world that license and regulate ground transportation. We have a great partnership with CoMotion and with John and Tim and the whole group, and we're proud to be here and to collaborate with our reciprocity agreement every year. I worked for over 20 years in government, a lot of different agencies, saw a lot of different things, and before I introduce our panelists and we start jumping into this thing, I just want to give everybody a little bit of background that, I actually had a conversation with the mayor when he was running for office where I told him, they're doing a lot of cool stuff on the West Coast, but New York City's falling behind. What are we doing with mobility? The MTA is one thing. You're doing stuff with bikes in the streets, but what are we doing with flying taxis? What are we doing with automated vehicles? What about the ferry system? It's been a system that has not worked absent high subsidies, whereas in Scandinavia they're doing great stuff. And he listened and he said, no, we're going to do big things. And I started losing confidence when, a couple of years went by, and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, standing with the Joby aircraft and with the EDC, hanging out on the helicopter pad in downtown, talking about how we're going to take off literally and figuratively and create a multi-modal hub for innovation for package delivery. And this is the Manhattan Downtown Heliport project. And I was actually at the EDC a bid. And it was a very collaborative bid. It wasn't an RFI, but it felt like an RFI when I was in the room. It's like, here's what we want to do, and we want all of you to partner with us, and we want you to bid with your ideas, but here's a general template. So I'm very privileged to have the whole team here, public and private, which is what CoMotion is all about, public and private partnerships. New York City EDC, led by Andrew Kimball, is a really unique agency that does economic development for the city, but also a lot of people don't know that they own infrastructure, and they have piers and areas around the city that they control real property. They've leveraged a lot of different mechanisms to make this mobility hub what it's going to become in the next year or two. So we're going to really focus on that, and we're going to focus a little bit about talking about like some lessons learned from their experiences. So to my immediate left, I have Anton Fredrickson. Well, we just got promoted. Congratulations. He was head of aviation for several years, for a year or so at the EDC, and now he's been promoted to head of ports, waterfront, and transportation in the transportation department at EDC. So now he's responsible for probably other things, but this project in particular. So let's give it up for Anton. Thanks for coming here. And then we have the vendor team. There's Group ADP with Joyce from Paris. Welcome. Hope you're not too jet-lagged. Who's actually been doing some great stuff with airports where they actually own the airports and they operate them, and not just in Paris, but in different countries. And got the first demo in the Paris Olympics of a vertiport going, and is going to be handling the owning and operating the downtown heliport. And last but not least is Robbie. on the end, who's formerly of Blade, had a lot of different roles, and he's actually going to be working on the infrastructure development with the eVTOLs at the pier. So we have the two vendors that, congratulations on the contract award, by the way. And we have the man of the hour, Anton, who actually is responsible for taking us off the ground by 2026, we hope, right?
If Leiden there can have his aircraft ready, then yes.
Well, Leiden, the pressure's on, man. Yeah, last time I saw you were in Somos, and you seemed very relaxed in Puerto Rico. Now we're in Miami. New York is a little bit more intense, my friend. You know, so let's start out by I don't know if we have the clicker around or we got a couple of slides and. Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's get the clicker going. I'm just going to jump right in with the question, and we'll start with you, Anton. It's like, how do we get here? You guys all have various experiences in the field, clearly. How did we get from vision to reality, and what brought you to this point, and what were some of the pain points, you know, that you had to encounter so far, and what do you envision in the future as the project moves forward? And maybe we could start by talking a little bit about the project, obviously, Anton.
For sure. So the New York City Economic Development Corporation has over 200 assets that it manages on behalf of New York City. And nearly 60 of those assets falls in the Ports, Waterfront, and Transportation team, of which we have the privilege of being the stewards of two heliports in Manhattan. The Downtown Skyport is the new name. We had a renaming ceremony earlier this month. It was previously the Downtown Manhattan Heliport, and then the East 34th Street Heliport further up in Midtown. And with these assets comes a lot of, like I said, resource drain, I could say, from the city's perspective. It's quite contentious having helicopters in New York. They provide very essential service on the medical side, for example, for police, for the president. Marine One comes into downtown Skyport. Also very important for strengthening business confidence, which is one of the things we do at EDC, one of our mission statements. And that's complicated by this tension with quality of life, which is another one of our objectives, which is building livable neighborhoods. And those are sometimes at odds with each other. And so, it was reaching a point where, there's a lot of pressure to shut down these facilities, and we can't really discriminate between different types of aircraft, and so we look to technology. Can we innovate our way through this? And fortunately, there is new technology very soon on the horizon, we hope, and we demonstrated this at an event in November 2023 when we launched the request for proposals for a new operator, or for an operator at the Downtown Manhattan Heliport. And we were fortunate to have both Joby and Volocopter show that this is real, and actually prove to a lot of the naysayers who were concerned about noise that you literally couldn't hear it. I mean, what was really special when this flight took place is people were whispering, because they didn't want to disturb the peace as this was taking off. So I think we proved that this is possible and can save the heliports, if you will. And now it's a matter of how do we transition this thoughtfully. The other piece I'll add that ties in is something called the Blue Highways. And this is the city's efforts to move freight off of the streets, off our congested roadways and onto the waterways. And we want to activate, or we will be activating, and Joyce and Robbie will be, their team is committed. It's a requirement in the concession agreement for them to activate maritime berthing infrastructure to accommodate this waterborne freight and last mile delivery.
That's what makes it so exciting, that you leveraged all of these different modes. So, Joyce, we know you have tremendous experience across the pond, and welcome to New York, by the way.
Thank you. To build on what Anton was saying, and even though we are positioned differently and we run and own and operate airport, Matt, as you mentioned, so pretty much different from what a city does, we come from the same perspective and the same objectives for the genesis of such an expertise and such a project. As an airport, we've been contemplating for the past 8 to 10 years about how the airports can develop beyond the airport city model, the Aerotropolis, that has been mainly the mainstream methodology of thinking to develop airports. We've been convinced that this cannot be the model for airport development for the upcoming 10 to 15 years. And we started working with the ecosystem around the airports, mainly public and private stakeholders, to look how the airports can expand into the city, but through multimodality, right? On top of that, we started looking at innovating in terms of energy and trying to lower our carbon footprint in terms of an airport development, trying to integrate electrification, mainly on our air sides, but also new energies like hydrogen, and trying to understand how new technology can lower the carbon footprint of airport, but most importantly, allow for the deployment of technologies that are not noisy, right? Because as an airport, we have a lot of complaints from the people that are living around the airports. And third, and most importantly, also, and through our innovation team, we constantly look at exploring tech that might at one point in time disrupt the way an airport operates, right? And say how we can take how an airport operates today and diversify it and explore new opportunities for an airport to develop outside of the airport's premises. And for all of these reasons, so first, the reinvention of the Aerotropolis model, the innovation on the energy and on the value chain positioning led us to explore and start exploring advanced air mobility globally some 5 to 6 years ago. And this is why we started more detailing that thought and thinking what does that mean for our airports, but most importantly, what does that mean for our city as well. And while we were developing that line of thought, we thought that it's important also to look at what's coming ahead and what's lining up in terms of major public events. And this is where the Olympics made sense in 2024. So we worked towards that goal without actually being a major milestone for the roadmap. It's definitely a very important event to bring the public and private stakeholders together, but most importantly to accelerate regulations and to accelerate the mobilization of public stakeholders, which in a country like France and a city like Paris is pretty much complicated to do without a major event like that. So we worked towards that goal, building up the expertise internally, and most importantly trying to develop the expertise in terms of engineering and planning, airspace integrations, working very closely with the civil aviation authorities. And for the past 4 to 5 years, we've basically built up that expertise on all of these streams. And we collaborated with different partners, amongst other Skyports. We, aside from partnering up as a project partner, we are one of the major investors in Skyport since 2018, because we were convinced that in order to access that new space, the advanced air mobility space, it's important to develop the expertise, but also to partner up and invest in startups that are leading the way in that space. And then the New York City bid came along, and we felt that we were more than ready to export that expertise that we've developed nationally and locally in Paris, and to partner up with Skyports on this. And we won that bid, and we were more than confident that we are able, and we will be able to lead on the transformation works that are required in that project.
And you know, it's funny, the Olympics, I mean, seem to go hand in hand with UAM. Everybody who is thinking about hosting an Olympics, including LA, you know, we missed the boat in New York. I was part of that failed bid, and we don't want to talk about it anymore. But, you know, the Olympics, you know, this is a great, you're highlighting a city and what the future is all about, almost like what we used to have the World's Fair in the 30s in New York City. But, you know, Robbie, you know, Skyports, I mean, and you have experience, you know, as an operator working with Blade, with the noise complaints, which have been dogging them for many years because they're just regular helicopters. But it goes well beyond that. And congratulations in your new role, Robbie. And tell us a little bit about Skyport's role and, you know, how you got to where you are. Your background is seems like it's perfectly suited for this project.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's been a very interesting road, having been at Blade for 9 years, working with all the operators that operate at Downtown Skyport. Now, you know, seeing the lack of innovation for years that had existed at Downtown Skyport, and you know, what I've been saying lately is running a heliport isn't rocket science, but navigating what you, Antana, and Andrew navigated in this bid process is. And you know, we're obviously super, you know, thankful and happy that we are the ones who are, you know, your stewards of this asset. And you know, for those of you that don't know, Skyport's mission is pretty simple. It's to build the infrastructure necessary to enable advanced air mobility. And if my numbers are not incorrect, I do believe that when you take out oil and gas, the Downtown Skyport is, I think, globally the busiest heliport in the world. So.
And New York's the second busiest market in the world.
Yes, as you painstakingly deduced over the weekend. But we're super fortunate to have this incredible asset to really be more of an innovation test bed, not just for the city, but for the country and the world. I think all eyes in this industry, they're one on the OEMs and two on where can we land these things, because these vehicles, as fantastic as they are really only as useful as are convenient the places that you can land them. I think that the location of this asset is really incredible in terms of the time savings that it can provide New Yorkers and those visiting. For those of you that don't know, currently Downtown Skyport is really largely a tourism hub. It's kind of the ultimate tourist experience. Come to New York, hop in a helicopter ride and get amazing views of the city. And what we are committed to doing is really finding ways to diversify the use case of this asset into more of a point-to-point transportation model. As Anton said earlier, noise is a real problem, and now that I'm, seeing the 311 noise complaints, I know how much of an offender really, Blade is, even though, those types of services are what the future of advanced air mobility is going to be. It's not so much going up for a, 15-minute tour of a city, as it is being able to fundamentally have an impact on your life by saving so much time. I remember I started off at Blade very, very young, back before I think even their Series A started, as an intern living in New Jersey. Our offices were at the West 30th Street Heliport, and at the end of the day, all the aircraft were going back to base, and I was an 18-year-old intern able to hop on the helicopters to the airport, about 10 minutes away from my childhood home. And that was before I even really knew what the term urban air mobility was. I don't even think that anybody at Blade really knew what it was back in 2015, 2016. It really wasn't that widely known yet. So, I was fortunate to have been able to have experienced it firsthand, and then spent a lot of time really being able to play with different route combinations and to understand what makes the business model work. And location really are the three most important things. And that's what we at Skyports are doing, along with our partners at Group ADP, is really building the ground networks that will be required in order for these vehicles and this whole industry to, no pun intended, take off. But I spent a lot of time down here in Miami. I know Anton did as well, trying to jumpstart the AAM industry down here. And it's a chicken or the egg problem. In New York, you have this incredibly robust helicopter market where the tourism component of these companies' businesses keeps their charter and their scheduled services in business, whereas in more secondary and tertiary markets like Miami, like LA, the tourism market isn't there, partially because the infrastructure isn't there. But you're not going to get investment on the operator level unless there's infrastructure for the operators to operate out of. And you're not going to get, and vice versa. So super excited to be at Downtown Skyport and working to build more of a market for AAM as Leiden gets his aircraft certified.
Yeah, location is everything. I mean, so I've been representing Blade as my law firm for many years now, and I'll never forget. We built out the whole ground transportation infrastructure to get people to the helipads, and I remember there was some crazy Daily News reporter that went out there one day, and the 5-minute drive or the 5-minute ride from the heliport to the airport was like great, but it took 45 minutes in an Uber to get across town. It defeated the whole purpose. So I don't know if congestion pricing is helping with that. We'll see. But location is everything. But maybe we could talk a little bit about what this is going to look like. I know you just started and things are in development, but we have a Blue Highways grant, and you have the Marine. I don't know if we can explain it by looking at the photo, but like what's it going to look like, and what are the other things we're going to do? Because this is what really makes it innovative, is that you're creating a multimodal hub with, I think, e-cargo deliveries and sustainability all around. So maybe, Anton, we can go back to you and like, what's this going to look like? Where's stuff going to go? Like, where are the ships going to come in? Where are the craft going to go? And more importantly, are the craft going to be piloted? Because my first involvement with this industry was Booz Allen and NASA hired me to work on the use case study many years ago. and all of these characters we're talking about was automated craft. And I just think, in my opinion, that's a mistake. I feel like we need to start with pilots first.
Talking about the vessels, like the floating vessels, or
The craft.
okay.
Not the floating vessels, but the craft, aircraft.
Oh, the aircraft as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think
So we'll
maybe we
cover
could
both
just
of those,
add
yeah.
a little bit of fill in some of the blanks on, like, we're going to have pilots or not, or where's it going to go, and what else is going to happen at this location.
Yes, these are piloted vehicles, both
Good.
the vessels that you see as well as the aircraft. In terms of the Blue Highways initiative that you touched on, just zooming out, there's $200+ billion worth of goods that's trying to go east of the Hudson in New York. There's 11 million consumers east of the Hudson, and it really only goes between 2 points, the George Washington Bridge and the Verrazzano. And those are choke points, and once they're in the city, then these trucks are congesting all the streets, even with congestion charging. We need to find other ways to move goods into the city west of the Hudson. So why don't we just, or east of the Hudson. So why don't we just use the Hudson, use the East River? And that's what the Blue Highways Initiative does. It builds upon prior work that the city has done with the Department of Sanitation, for example. So a lot of our trash actually goes out by barge today already. And now we're looking at doing that with what's called, the Blue Highways. It comes in many different flavors. The one that I think is most relevant for downtown skyports is around last mile logistics. So the idea is that you would kind of pre-pack these boxes or cubes, potentially with the bike, sometimes without the bike. These kind of what they call eQua, these electric-powered vehicles. They drive onto a ferry-like roll-on, roll-off vessel from the New Jersey side, comes into the southern tip of Manhattan, pulls up to this barge that you see here, and then just drives off, delivers the packages in lower Manhattan, comes back empty, sometimes with the returns, and does the whole trip in reverse. And we think there's a lot of synergies with the heliport. There's a lot of demand we're seeing from a lot of last mile logistics providers trying to get into this lower Manhattan congested space. So this is also a way to demonstrate that this asset can be more than a heliport. It's part of the reason why we renamed it to be Skyport, obviously because of the electrification that's happening, but also the electrification and the maritime side as well. And it helps us, makes a compelling case as well to the community. This is more than just an aviation asset, although that's still the primary use.
And are all the vessels going to be electric as well, or?
That is the hope. I mean, we're not putting limitations on that right now, so it's kind of as the technology matures, but we'd really like to encourage that, and we want to work with our partners here to provide the capabilities to accommodate those vessels as well.
As part of the scope of work, the electrification, like maybe we could talk a little bit about that. Where's it going to be? How we're going to work with Con Ed, and how we're going to get the electricity to the pier, and do you envision like they'll be charging for the ferries as well, the vessels and the cargo bikes and the craft, or?
Our goal is to charge any and everything. We're currently working with Con Ed, where we actually have a meeting scheduled with them next week to begin really hammering down on a site plan for getting first a substation on site, and then last week we had a kickoff with some of the eVTOL OEMs to have get a more firm understanding of what their charging requirements are going to be, so that we can start laying the cabling and the groundwork to get that all started. I'm not sure if you guys can see, but on the kind of northwestern side of the screen, that is really the only space that we have to play with outside of cantilevering charging equipment off over the water, where corrosion is not fun to deal with and is very expensive to prevent, or impossible to prevent, expensive to fix. We also have we have a 4,000-gallon Jet A fuel tank right up against the street. So looking to see how much of the parking lot we can carve out for a substation, where we do hope to eventually, have all vehicles, including the cars, providing those last mile transfers for passengers going point to point out of our facility. Do hope to be able to, charge them all on site, but still very much in the early stages of the Con Ed of figuring out what the capacity on site can be.
And these are going to be vessels that deliver goods. Is there also a blueprint for a passenger ferry EV service? And how is that going to reduce subsidies, I hope? I mean, I hear different things about whether, and we're dealing with this with our Ferry of the Future report now. I talk to these EV these EV vessel makers, and they say in Scandinavia, it's a two-part process. You know, we need to make it efficient by having smaller vessels that are on demand, but that the EVs will actually be less costly to run in addition to obviously less polluting. Is that something that's in the cards for this project, or is it going to be all freight by vessel?
So for Downtown Skyport, it'll be freight focused. If you look just behind that vessel, there's a number of New York City ferries. That's Pier 11. So that's the main ferry terminal for Lower Manhattan there. So that'll continue being the passenger side, and then you can walk over and take your eVTOL tour. So I mean, it's all very close to each other.
Okay. Well, we've all been kumbaya to this point, so let's get into some of the sticky issues now. Anton referred to them as pain points, choke points, policy planning. I mean, the organizers wanted us to talk about planning and policy. Joyce, I thought I'd go to you since you have an urban planning background. And you also had, I don't know if you want to talk about it, if it's a bad dream you want to forget, but I know there were a lot of plans to do a lot more at the Olympics in Paris, and then we ended up just doing like a showcase thing. So, you know, what were some of the issues that you encountered? Because the roadmap, I kind of look at it like this is all planned out. The roadmap that you have is in the RFP. But then there's the policy and the stakeholder roadmap where people complain, they bring lawsuits, community boards, NIMBYism. Like, what is some of your experiences as an airport operator, especially with eVTOLs, and what does New York have in store based upon some of the choke points that you've been experiencing, and how do we overcome them?
Honestly, Matt, I wouldn't call that a bad dream. I would simply call it out the way it is. It was an experimentation, and it's good that we had it, because I'm always convinced as an urban planner, as someone who has worked on setting out, city plans for 15, 20 years, 30 years down the line, things change, right? And we need to adapt to the way things change. And it was good for us to have a roadmap, a long-term roadmap for Paris for 2030. And it was good to be able to use the 2024 Olympic and Paralympic Games as an accelerator, right? As I said in the beginning, it helped us bring the public and the private stakeholder together. This is not easy, right? And if we were able to get to where we got in the summer of the Olympics, it is because we had that major milestone where all the public sector wanted so much to get this done, right? And it helped us accelerate the development of the infrastructure. So what happened in the summer of the Olympics is that Volocopter, the eVTOL manufacturers that was supposed to be running these routes, didn't get the certification in time. And that's okay, right? It's part of the gap between a plan and what we were actually be able to execute. But the good things is, and this is what we say internally in the team, but also with our partners, is that we've been hearing for the past 4 to 5 years that infrastructure will be the bottleneck for all of this. And the summer of the Olympic and Paralympic Games proved that the infrastructure was not the bottleneck. The network of the 5 vertiports was up and ready in Paris for operations, right? Electrified, the landing was there, everything was there, right? So it's important. It's a little success story, but we need to celebrate it, right? Because it was there. And definitely, and as we've seen it in Paris, but also as we are seeing it almost all around the world, certification will take time, and that's okay. As an infrastructure operator and provider, we need to accompany the OEMs and manufacturers in their long quest for certification, because safety comes first. And this is why by the end of the day, in the summer of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, we decided to just limit that into an experimentation around one of the 5 vertiports that we have had, because the aircraft wasn't certified, and we weren't, neither us or the civil aviation authorities were willing to take that risk. So what are the lessons learned? What are the learnings that we can take from Paris and basically help us to back up the team and also everything we're trying to do in New York? Essentially is, and this is the starting point for Paris, is to bring everybody around the table. And that was our starting point in Paris. Even if, as an airport operator, we decided to take this sponsorship role and an animator role for the Paris ecosystem, we were surrounded by the Ministry of Transportation, the civil aviation authorities, but also the industry, from skyports to different OEMs. And as Robbie mentioned, one of the key things that allowed us to plan our infrastructure is bringing the OEMs together and talking to them to understand their prerequisites in terms of what is it that this infrastructure needs, right? In terms of the space, the charging requirement, the ground handling. operating a craft like an aircraft like Volocopter and landing it on our vertiports is not the same as operating a Joby aircraft and landing it on our vertiports. They have different charging mechanisms, and this needed to be accommodated early on in the planning phases. So there's a lot of work that has been done in the beginning for us to ensure that the infrastructure is agnostic and is adaptable to any OEM that will be coming and operating at an infrastructure at any point in time, even if we started the launch, or the initial plan was to start the launch with Volocopter. Second was to onboard the communities, and this is what we've done, and this is what it's an active I'd say field that we are aiming also to do around the New York Heliport, is trying to onboard the community, but also most importantly try to talk to people and understand their concerns. We've done a lot of that in Paris because people were very concerned of two things. One, for this new technology to be only targeted to elite and only the rich people that will be able to pay for such a mobility offer. And second, they were aware, they were really concerned about privacy issues, right? So they thought that these engines will be flying over their gardens, right? And then they'll be overlooking their balconies, landing in their backyards. I mean,
it ended up taking off from Versailles, didn't it? Wasn't the...
It's the one of the aerodrome that you have in the Paris region that's back to back with the Versailles Garden.
Okay.
It's an actual aerodrome. So when we started off working with the community, different NGOs, mainly the media that was mostly against the project, and we started actually explaining to them what's the roadmap, what's the projected roadmap, what is it that we're actually doing for 2024, what are the projected routes and how we are doing it, and the fact that we are flying and operating helicopter routes at a different height. So people started understanding, basically, the logic of it. In parallel, also, what we explained is the use cases that we're working on. I've heard it in a panel just before this. It's very important to understand that advanced air mobility and the deployment of eVTOLs is not only for flying taxis, right? It's not only to take a person from point A to point B, or do like some touristic and leisure use cases, but it also a technology that will allow some other use cases to develop, like the medical use cases. And this is why we've partnered up in Paris with the hospitals of Paris to test actually this use case that's meaningful and that talks actually to the Parisians and address their pain points more specifically.
Well, that's a really good lesson learned. I mean, you know, in terms of a UAM roadmap is really the stakeholder involvement. I mean, I know the community board has been suing for all sorts of things.
Community board one is very supportive, actually.
Now they are, but like, you know, they usually complain about the helicopters. I represent a lot of bus companies, and God forbid we want to put a bus that's transporting people, you know, to a different city and getting cars off the road in somebody's backyard. They all complain about it, but maybe we could talk a little bit about the use case, Robbie, and where we're going. But before we do that, I don't want to just emphasize the educational importance of talking to people and making them, seeing is believing. Like, you know, we see all the Waymos popping up in Scottsdale, and people get used to them, you know, so familiarity, you know, breeds some type of comfort, but you know, doing that education campaign is so important. But the other takeaway, I think, the more I think about it is, you know, when government moves slow, right? But when stuff happens, like there's a big event where you're showcasing things like the Super Bowl or Olympics or the World Cup, things move at lightning speed. And also when there's a tragedy, unfortunately, I was there when 9/11 happened, working for the city, when this Hurricane Sandy, like when stuff that's bad happens too, the procurement process kind of goes out the window. Public-private partnerships happen very quickly, and it's a great opportunity to bring this type of project to a city that is looking to do this. Things, as you can see, there's much more enthusiasm when you're talking about the Olympics coming to your city, right? So that's one takeaway I got from some of your comments. But Robbie, let's talk about the use cases, because I know Blade is, a lot of people think it was a helicopter company before you went to Skyports, right? But it's really not. It's a network that deals with getting people to the helicopters, and they even have private charters. But during the pandemic, they pivoted to organ deliveries and a lot of that stuff. So, like, where do you see, like, what do you see these craft doing? You know, is it going to be passengers, organs? You know, people going to the airports. Like, is this being thought of, like, what the use cases are? Or is that a question mark at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of the above, and you're right. You know, Blade doesn't actually operate any aircraft. They're a demand aggregator, and you know, the idea for it started when, you know, the CEO of Blade was at the East 34th Street Heliport going out to the Hamptons for the weekend, and he knew 3 other people at the heliport, and they all chartered their own aircraft, and they all took off from the same place and landed at the same place at the same time, but there were 3 aircraft. And he got out and he was like, what the heck, we all could have saved thousands of dollars. And that's how the idea was born. The organ transportation use case is, I think, the most compelling, and I think the largest problem that we as an industry all have to have united around to combat is this idea of NIMBYism and this idea that, I can't use this, so it's no good to me. A lot of people couldn't afford cars when they first came out in the early 1900s, and now, everybody does have cars and everybody does benefit from the use of cars. But the Blade building out the organ business wasn't intentional. It started because the passenger business in March of 2020 evaporated, and Blade had these contracts with all of these operators to commit hours on the airframes, and they were sitting in the hangar doing nothing. Blade got a phone call from NYU Langone one day. We also, at the time when I was there, would dabble in jet charter, just general jet charter, and they had a mechanical, and they were calling any and everybody that returned an SEO result on Google for jet charter. And we said, yeah, we can fly you from New York to Florida. How soon can your doctors be at Teterboro? They said, oh, well, traffic right now is about an hour from East 34th Street to Teterboro. And we said, hang on a second. We can send a helicopter, and we can have you guys at the aircraft in about 3.5 minutes. And then when we actually dug into the financials with some of the ground medical companies, we were doing it for less on a helicopter than these ambulance companies were charging to do it with blue lights on the ground, taking almost 10 times as long. So the short answer to what will these aircraft do, it's whatever the highest and best use of the aircraft is. eVTOLs in the beginning, there aren't going to be enough of them to replace Blade's business and to replace all of our tour operator attendants at downtown skyports. But over time, as more vehicles come into the fleet and are in operation, we're hoping that the customers that are comfortable flying on helicopters today will be open-minded enough that they're fine with what we would call an asset swap. Simply going from a combustion, turbine engine helicopter over to an eVTOL.
Are tourism UAMs on the table here as well? Tourism.
We would like to see that be the first use case,
Yes.
Okay.
especially given the challenges here at Downtown Sky. I mean, it's 90% plus sightseeing tours, and it's kind of the perfect use case for an aircraft that's entry into service, maybe with a more limited range, and also why don't you kind of build public acceptance around that, have people try it out that are actually local as well. Today, a lot of the tours are tourists from abroad. So I think that would be a perfect use case, and you don't have to rely on any other ends. Like even if it's just this place, just downtown Skyport, you can come back, recharge there. You don't have to wait on. You get rid of the excuse of waiting on another node.
Do we have a very progressive city council. In fact, I did a panel with the majority leader of the city council, who's the chair of the EDC committee, Amanda Farias and Andrew, a couple of weeks ago, and they are really as one of their top policy matters. It's all about equity, low-income communities, ferries and services to places where it's affordable. So you mentioned the elitism issue, right, Joyce? So do we see that being something that we're going to run up against big time in New York? That this is just a service for the Hamptons elites, that the average New Yorker who's living in Staten Island somewhere and can't get one of these services, can't afford them. Is this something that you are preparing for, or do you feel like that's not going to be an issue here?
Absolutely, and it's front and center in everything we've done, even informing this RFP. But for starters, for all New Yorkers, you can benefit from an improvement in quality of life if we start replacing a lot of the traditional combustion engine aircraft with these silent electric ones. So that's the starting point. We also wanted to begin with our existing infrastructure, but not preclude the ability to explore how could we add kind of dots on the map, maybe only electric, maybe in places that don't have good transit access, may not have access to good subway lines. And so we're in the early stages of planning that out, and I invite those interested to kind of join in that journey.
And one thing also, maybe we could all address this in some way, is talking about emergencies and bad stuff that happens, resiliency, floods, hurricanes, terrorist attack, God forbid. If these things happen, what level of planning is it being done to utilize the craft and the resources here to evacuate people or for emergency services? Is that part of the plan here with the UAM roadmap in New York? Or?
Yeah, I mean, at Downtown Skyport, we've preemptively had meetings with the Coast Guard, the Marine One team, FDNY, NYPD.
OEM? Office
Yes,
of Emergency
on our-
Management's
yeah.
in the mix? Okay.
Yeah. During 9/11, this facility was used pretty heavily, and it continues to be used heavily, in kind of times of crisis. It's the only heliport in the city that can accommodate really the aircraft that these government agencies are using, which is why its existence is so important. So while we are building the relationships and planning to work with those government agencies, I can't say there's any, there's no like doomsday prepping going on our end for how we're going to evacuate the whole city from the heliport if that day were to ever come. But certainly building the relationships so that those agencies know that we are there to support them when
or even a transit strike, When I was working for the city, we had a transit strike, and it was my 5 minutes of fame. I was on the TV explaining with the mayor and the governor how people must share cabs, or otherwise they're going to be fined. And it actually, we looked at every single resource. We took the dollar commuter vans and we put them out there. We ran loops. So I can imagine if there is something like that happens, God forbid. I mean, it's not legal for them to strike, but they did it anyway. But every asset needs to be leveraged. So, one of the things I remember from the use case study with NASA was a lot of flight plans and thought went into, and I don't know if this is something that comes up in your experience in planning airports, is what to do in the event of an emergency landing, especially with the automated craft. How do we know whether we can go to this soccer field to land if something bad happens, right? So is that something that is not a concern because you have piloted craft, or is there a contingency plan, when we all unfortunately had a tragedy, with an operator a week or so ago, where some tourists passed away with a crash, and it's being investigated by the NTSB. But what type of safety mechanisms are there for crash landings, and is that something that's part of what you do, or is that more a separate thing that the Joby craft are responsible for?
It's part of our emergency response plan. All of our, line service technicians are, trained on basic, firefighting. Luckily, there's a fire station that's about a minute drive from the facility. We have foam lines and water lines. I think that one thing with eVTOLs is, or rather what's more of an unknown, is how to extinguish a fire. And I think a lot of the firefighting experts have come to the conclusion that you just have to isolate it, make sure everyone is away from it, get anything else that can burn away from it, and let it extinguish itself. I think no amount of foam can put out a lithium-ion battery fire when it's that large, or
You'd be using safe charging infrastructure, right? Because the FDNY does have a standard now for bike and scooter charging, and I assume it's all going to be according to those standards, right?
Yeah, certainly. And I think also the layout of this facility compared to the other heliports in Manhattan is opportune for, if something were to happen, it is isolated. It's not up against buildings. You're not up against any major roadways, and you're on the water.
Joyce, did you want to follow up on it?
Yeah, I mean, going beyond the specific case of the heliport of Manhattan, there is also a whole regulatory framework that's being put, at least in Europe, but I think FAA is following up in the US, on setting up, as part of planning the vertiport network, a complementary contingency sites for landing in case of emergency, in case of losing a rotor or a battery, for these engines to be able to land. For example, in Paris, for the initial network that we've planned out for 2024 of 5 sites, we had to actually propose to the authorities an additional 5 sites between these routes. So in case Volocopter or any other OEMs that would be operating on that route between A and B have the option to land in a soccer field, or actually in an area that basically doesn't have any density, any urban density, or or any other urban development. So I think today, and it's a work in progress, and this is why this is very exciting for this industry as such. The private sector is being involved in the co-writing and co-construction of the regulatory framework, trying to bring in the expertise they have from an airport operator perspective, or other skyports, but also other private stakeholders like the OEMs, try to understand how contingency plan can be set in order to ensure high level of safety and security for these operations.
Yeah, and last question quickly for everybody. Correct me if I'm wrong on the timeline for this. But my understanding is that you need some FAA approvals, and then there's going to be, you were authorized to start work at the beginning of this year, and then the plan and the timeline is to have something operational by 2026. So what New York is going to, maybe we can start with you, Anton. What are New Yorkers going to see in 2026 when they look here? How are things going to change?
A lot of progress underway, I'll say. Mm-hmm. So in terms of from the city perspective, the requirement on the concession agreement is kind of two timelines, and it's the earlier of the two, or two deadlines. So one is definitely within the first 5 years of the concession agreement. They have to build out the electrification work for at least 3 chargers, and the maritime component has to be activated. And that's so they can access the second 5 years of the term. This is how we structured. We wanted to provide a long lease term, but also an incentive to build this out early. And that means they could be building this out even if there is no FAA certification, God forbid, the next 5 years. And then on top of that, we wanted to make sure that they're not waiting until the end.
Well, if Trump has to land there, I could see that they'll give you the approval.
They may get the approval, yeah, exactly.
We'll see.
But he's not Marine One's not an eVTOL yet. But then there's also an earlier of date. So if there is FAA certification, say 2026, the infrastructure needs to be built out within a year of that certification. So that creates an incentive to start early, and since it has to be built there anyways, might as well start now, and my understanding is that's already happening.
So rides will be 2027, you think, or is that?
We will be ready as soon as the aircraft are certified. We're working very closely with the OEMs who...
No pressure.
Chobi?
Anyone from the FAA in the room? Yeah.
Yeah, FAA needs to move a little quicker. Okay, so you guys are ready for maybe 2027.
Yeah,
there'll be stuff happening. People will be taking off.
I think so. And one other benefit is that this site, I think the last of the federal funding is about to lapse in the next year or so. So
it's already lapsed. Yeah.
It's already lapsed. Yeah. So we're not kind of required necessarily to conform to some of the newer advisory circulars that are out there for heliport and vertiport design. Of course, we're going to make sure that it is a safe facility, it's an efficient layout, but that's a roadblock that we're lucky not to be subjected to here.
And it's a skyport, it's not a vertiport, so it's a slightly different terminology.
Yeah.
If this works well at the skyport, do we see in the next 10 years maybe some of these craft taking off from the tops of buildings?
We'll see. The winds aloft on tops of buildings, I think, are what partially contributed to the Pan Am crash back in, what was that, the late 60s, early 70s?
70s, yeah.
Would I love to see it? Yes. I know from my time down here, we get charter requests to the top of the 1,000 Museum building all the time, and Part 135 operators have wind spread limits. You can't operate usually if it's more than a 15 knot difference between the sustained winds and the gusting winds, and when you're up, 600 feet in the air, your winds aloft are a lot stronger than they are on the ground. So I think while it would be fantastic to see it, I know that the infrastructure cost to build rooftop facilities is significantly more, and I think that coupled with what I'll call more experimental business models for eVTOLs early on, I don't think that the financials would support that kind of development.
Is that happening in any of your projects, Joyce? Or I know, aren't they doing that in Dubai, or aren't they coming off the top of the?
So with Dubai, it's we're building the parking garage and we're building the vertiport on top of the parking garage. So it's not like we're decking over an existing garage like what you might see at the DT1 heliport here in Fort Lauderdale.
Is this happening in your world, Joyce? Or?
I totally align with Robbie here for a fact that we tried to test it in Paris. One of the vertiport was supposed to be on top of the Arch building in the Défense, in the business district of Paris. And we've done all the studies that's required for over a year and a half. the wind basically was the main constraint. Second, the safety. So basically, if a fire just happened on top of this building, it's an office building, so it will take a lot of time to evacuate people and actually to isolate that aircraft. And
So parking garage is probably a better use case.
lower. And three, basically, it was the building footprint. It was so small, basically to accommodate the infrastructure for recharging, but also everything that's required for that aircraft to actually land from. From a business plan perspective, it didn't really make any sense. At least today, where the technology is today, it didn't make any sense.
Yeah, and where I see the early stage AAM business models and services really working, it's not intra-city. I think that this technology is going to have a similar impact on migration patterns that the train did, back in the early 20s. If you look at where all the most expensive suburbs are of New York City, they're all the towns that have trains and easy access into Manhattan. Now, those trains aren't necessarily, yes, you can transfer to a subway for a more local station, but you're not getting on NJ Transit or LIRR and getting dropped off right on Christopher Street in the West Village. You have to transfer. So I think that where we're going to see these vehicles most widely used, and where they will also have the largest impact on quality of life in a good way for the users of it, is getting folks out of the city to points more convenient to where they live, and enabling folks to live better lives for less money, further away from the city where there aren't currently trains or roads that are easily accessible to Manhattan.
Possibly even maybe replacing regional air service. Is that a possibility? I mean, I really, sympathize with people who live in like Buffalo and stuff. You got to take 2 or 3 flights to get where you need to go. What a hassle. I mean, can this, what's the range of these craft? Like how, I don't know, is Leiden, you wanna, is there a use case? Can this replace air travel for certain range or distance?
I mean, I think I'm convinced that regional air mobility is one of the most viable use cases for this technology, and completely aligned with Robbie here. I think, and at least in the beginning, in some specific contexts like Paris or cities like New York or London that are well served by the public transportation network, deploying eVTOLs doesn't make any sense in terms of the value proposition that you are offering to the citizen, right? For example, in Paris, the public transportation network transports 4 million people per day, right? You can reach any point to any point in the city when the metro works in 30 minutes, right? So it's to go back to your example on what is the value proposition of an eVTOL service once you want to propose it. So in terms of a region like Ile-de-France or the Paris region, it makes a lot more sense to actually use the VTOL to connect the city ports of Paris to actually other suburbs or other destinations in the region.
Interesting. Well, it looks like we're out of time, but time flies when we're having fun. Let's give a big round of applause for our panelists. Thanks. This was a really good discussion. I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. And we're here if you want to ask some questions of the panelists. So thank you for coming.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.